ChatGPT and Gen AI tools have hit the mainstream. The chatter was everywhere, by almost everyone. We feel the discussion has been more philosophical than practical. We know enterprise technologists are using real AI to create efficiencies that result in real business outcomes. So, we created a show to talk to real practitioners about real-world active projects that are leveraging this exciting new technical advantage. Welcome to LiveAI.
Welcome to another episode of LiveAI, where we bring practical enterprise AI use cases to our audience. With me today is a very good friend of mine, Trace3's own SVP of Cloud, Chris Nicholas. Chris, welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
What AI use case do you have for us today?
I have an amalgamation of AI use cases for you today. We'd love to talk through on LiveAI today about how we want to help the enterprise accelerate AI adoption, but to do it in a manner that's safe, with the courage to experiment.
So is there any AI use case, and I know you've been involved in many engagements with our client base, is there anyone in particular that you think is a good launch point for us to explore the methodology behind how we got there?
We're partnered with a Fortune 100 financial services firm. And they came to us with a thesis of being able to unlock the power in their financial data on which they make investment decisions, and work to improve their portfolios over time. And so, ironically, this firm, based on all the marketing and thesis they'd seen, in the press, like their idea was to target, leveraging an individual experience solution like Copilot. At that
like Microsoft Copilot.
Exactly.
Solution. Yeah.
And so, we began, before we talked about any kind of sensitive data management and anything to do with risk and AI safety, we decided that collaboratively the best approach would be to host a think tank session where we could really kind of carve out use cases, not just in finance, but around the organization, all up. And so, what was wonderful and quite unexpected was over the course of a 4-hour period, we documented 400 use cases. So
100 use cases an hour.
100 use cases an hour, and the funny thing is once they started flowing, there was no stopping the ideas, right? So
somebody must have had some furious penmanship trying to keep all that organized.
That's right. And many of them were connected. So we were able to aggregate those and create a priority and a backlog. And but what was funny, what emerged as an outcome was, of those 400, and we were talking about Copilot, again, which is an individual experience. Of those 400, 240 plus, 245, were actually deemed not Copilot scope worthy, right? So
were they like other AI technology or just other technology? Like you don't need AI, period, or you just don't need Copilot to go do it?
Copilot could attack some of those use cases, but do it in a limited way. So what we were exposing to our client through this conversation was that there are better solutions for those ideas. And that's actually the trend that we're seeing that's massive in the enterprise today is there's use case confusion, or what we call use case misappropriation.
Misappropriation as in aligning appropriate technologies to the use case that you're trying to accomplish.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so and that really translates into our thesis and our go-to-market, and the best advice that we're providing our clients is that to prepare for AI adoption, you really got to get good at 3 to 4 different stratospheres of AI technology stacks. And so there's Copilot, which is designed to be augmentative for the individual user experience based on their individual rights to data. There's Copilot Studio, or custom Copilots, if you will, that extend the individual experience into something you can replicate and repeat for a team. So you've unlocked some magic. You want to make it available to others. That's the idea. There's the idea of putting a set of knowledge in front of a model, which we call retrieval augmented generation. And now, over the last 6 months or so, we're really seeing the rise and the advent of more enhanced automation. The thirst of human endeavor and human adventure is that we want to automate and make life as easy as possible. And so
Sure.
it applies to AI. And with the advent of agents, we're finally seeing kind of the real manifestation of where this is going, which is a more automated experience. So agents as well. And so when we looked at those 400 use cases, or those 400 wonderful ideas, if you create a map or a mapping to those 4 technology stacks, now you've got a much better answer and a much better way to solve for each of those ideas.
Kind of backing into which ones are viable for different kinds of tooling that you might use in order to like bring them to life. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty interesting, and getting to that whole like automation stage is something we've talked about here on the show before, but then also in conversations that you and I've had, which is just leveraging generative AI to have a conversation or to interrogate your data. Is humans don't want to just do less; they would prefer to do nothing. And being able to assign some kind of AI assistant and a swarm of agents, here's my intention, come back to me tomorrow and complete all this work so that I can just make some key decisions, and I don't want to be involved, and I don't want to have to get a result back and then have to go do 10 things. I want you to do all those 10 things. Where did you ultimately land? So you've got 400 use cases, you organize them by technology. Usually in some kind of workshop like that, there might be some prioritization of impact and level of investments, timelines. How did you go about arranging what they might end up pursuing in the end?
Yeah, so the first thing we did was categorize those use cases to the different technologies that they would apply to, solve them the best way. Because again, there's multiple ways to solve. The idea is to maximize impact and maximize effect. And so we did that mapping. Then we grouped together similar use cases that were somehow connected, and found that there was quite a bit of that going on. And I'll give you an example if I think that might be appropriate. So if we just take marketing as an example. So the idea of Copilot enhancing a marketer's ability to create a blog on topic X is a use case, right? Now imagine if that experience was enhanced by not, the AI system not waiting to be prompted by the writer. So in the Copilot scenario, you're ideating, you have to remember or force dialogue with the AI to basically augment whatever you've produced, and that's fine. That you get a good result, great even. What's better than that though is imagine if while you're authoring a given topic, you've got an agent that's like detecting what you're getting at and going out and doing live research and providing you references from the wild, or trending topics that are related to your writing experience. Now you've just enhanced, and you've removed the need for you to go and remember to prompt and be intelligent about the way you prompt and switch modalities in how you're writing, creating the content and also looking for answers. And that's just an integrated experience, right? So that's really easy to create with a custom Copilot. It's also a prompt away from creating this Copilot kind of sidekick.
Yeah, well, I love that, even just like the what's better than that type of thinking.
Yeah, so what's better than that? And actually, this occurred in this 4-hour meeting that I was talking about. Was okay. Imagine if, let's just transport back to Trace3, for example. Imagine if Trace3 had an archive of every blog we've ever written. What would emerge is Trace3's aesthetic, right? So we have the language we use, the words that we don't, the tone that we use, assuming consistency over time. We have a kind of an enterprise persona. So imagine if that was also kind of tuned into your Copilot experience, right? So imagine if we had a RAG style system that you could input your product, your write up, and it would Trace3ify for you. So that's better than the two things that we just described.
Yeah. Or what's even better than that it knows that we're writing blogs every week, and it's just looking at new news, creating the blog before we even wake up, and we just wake up to something to review.
And you've just touched on what we might create as an agent.
Sure. Yeah. And then it all makes sense then how all that stuff then starts to tie together. You start
Right.
to think bigger and bigger and bigger about what this thing could be.
Precisely.
And so you've got those 400 use cases, you divided them up by technology. I think they had an idea of what they thought they should be using Copilot for. You probably radically changed their ideas of there's, opening their minds to there's different sets of tools and how you might do for an individual versus a team versus maybe company wide, or down into like implementation of agents to go augment what they're trying to do. Where did you land at the end of this 4-hour session? So like if you do a workshop like this, whether our audience is doing that on their own or they're doing some kind of like guided experience, did you land on a few that they felt were feasible to pursue immediately? And I'm assuming we're going to talk about one of them today.
Yes, we did. We really believe in the MVP approach, the kind of the minimum viable product that leads to your first wow moment with adopting this technology. And by wow, I don't just mean emotionally or aesthetically. I mean tracked back to business value. So in the construct of Copilot, what we landed on was 3 ideas to take through all the way through to business measurement, which is important for those authorizing the investment in the technology. And so we picked sales ops, the sales ops use cases that were stitched together through the Copilot experience, marketing, and HR as the first 3 to kind of inspire the rest of the organization on the art of the possible.
So take us a little more in depth into those 3 use cases. So you've got departments that you want to impact. Can you speak a little bit to the metrics on what is the value that we're creating? What is the business value here? How are we actually tracking that? Were there certain metrics that you arrived at? And then what do the solutions actually do?
Okay, so yeah, this is one of the cleanest examples, and he's probably easiest to explain with just words. So I'll take a run at this one. Recruiting. And it's one that is by the way, it's almost ubiquitous, as in it applies to every organization that on the planet. So anyone tasked with recruiting has to do what we call candidate vetting, right? So you place a job ad, you receive a bunch of responses, and then it's on a human to kind of iterate through those resumes and select the best candidates for your organization. So the very first thing that we enabled through Copilot was that we measured from a business perspective was how long is it taking each recruiter to do candidate vetting for each candidate. And the answer that we got back from this organization was 2 days. So you post a job ad, you wait a week, you've got over 1,000 in most cases responses, and it takes about 2 days for the recruiter to iterate through those responses and select the 10 finalists that were then scheduled for interviews. Which
basically means that they're not even reading all 1,000, like they're just finding the first 10 that meet criteria.
So there's what was said, and then what happens in the real world, right? So
okay.
So what's claimed is that these are all looked at by a human, and the most promising are selected. And of the 10, the hiring manager would pick 3 to interview, right? So but 10 are submitted by the recruiter. So let's just put a pause on that because we're going to come back to it.
Okay.
So that's a 2-day experience. So now we've got 2 days of pay at the recruiter salary that we can say, like, okay, now we've got something that we can build a business case on. Let's see if we can improve that. So what we found was with Copilot, it was really easy because all of that messaging is hitting that user's Exchange, mailbox, and everything, because of the way the candidate system works, was had a message header that was identifiable.
And the data was readily available.
The data was clean and readily available. Yeah. So many of the candidates submitted resumes in either Word or PDF format. Those were very nicely processed by the semantic search index. Some of them included a cover letter in the body of the email, so that made it into the semantic index as well. So very clean data set. What we found was with Copilot, based on some intricate prompts that we helped arm the recruiters with, they were able to produce the 10 finalists from that 1,000, sometimes 2,000 candidate pool in less than 10 minutes, including human in the loop kind of spot checking, which is critically important in situations like this, right? We want to remove ethical bias and any inherent biases in Copilot. So including human in the loop processes to kind of pick some respondents at random and to kind of review those as well. So we're talking about an over 93% efficiency on the time that it takes to do candidate vetting. But here's the beautiful part, is that what happens in the real world is, if I'm a recruiter and I've got a task of filling 50 job recs, and I've got one that I had 1,000 respondents to, am I really going to look at 1,000 candidates, or am I just going to start from the top, find 10 that fit, and stop as soon as I found the 10th and submit my 10, and like basically ignore 1,800 applicants?
And there could be just complete gems.
There could be unicorns, right, in that data set. So the beautiful thing is, what's emerging is that not only are we radically reimagining the time that it takes to do candidate vetting, but with Copilot, we're actually looking at everybody, through that prompt and response interface. And you could posit that Copilot's helping you source kind of the best candidates, or a much better job of looking at everybody than a human could possibly do in the same amount of time. So those two things are emerging as outcomes. What makes it into the business case is that we are saving the recruiter time. The intangible, beautiful effect is that we're also improving the quality of candidate.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, is that, the way you describe that, that's a recruiter using Copilot, access to their data. Now, earlier you mentioned, hey, we've got all these other tools at our disposal, and when you start thinking beyond the scope of the individual, and I do think that this is where a lot of people in the industry are a little short-sighted with the power of what they can do with even like variations of Copilot.
Right.
But if you think beyond the individual, okay, that's benefiting one individual, but we start to think, well, what's better than that? As we start to think like department-wide.
Yeah. So let's talk about the connected use cases. So the connected use case was, okay, so are we going to rely on every recruiter to craft the same kind of inquisition prompts on the candidate pools? Like, no, let's not rely on everybody to be as creative as the best person on that team. Let's take, a refined approach to how we query the candidate pools and like provide guidance to the recruiters on how to prompt that data set. Let's get better at that over time. But let's take those improvements to everybody. That's what a custom Copilot is for. So we can preload it with suggested prompts, create a custom experience, provide it to our recruiters as a solution. So now everyone's got kind of our best ideas on how to query their candidate pools for each type of role.
And can improve that over time.
So that's the connected use case, right? Now, somebody in that think tank session goes, well, what if we had a data set of everybody that's ever applied to our firm? What if we could unlock the power in that? And there is tremendous power in that. So, imagine if you take the last 10,000 people that have applied to your company across all requisitions. Now you've got a pool of people that are interested, that have expressed interest in your firm, right? And so when you look at the longevity of doing things like reducing the time it takes to fill a rec, you've got a candidate pool that's expressed interest that you can query constantly. So if you have an urgent need next week for a high-level program manager to run a new initiative that the company wasn't expecting, well, now we can query everyone that's ever kind of fit that profile like this without even waiting for interested people to apply. And you can reach out and contact these folks. We're looking at a drastic decrease in the amount of time it takes for us to vet and source talent for our organization, which inherently allows us to kind of run leaner, but accelerate our hiring process. So again, another beautiful impact. There's a lot of power in that data, of everyone that's ever applied to your company. So that's the connected use case. That's what you would solve with a RAG style solution.
Being able to take all organizational data, put it in a place to where you can access it then with these new types of applications that you're creating, leveraging generative AI to explore that data. And the difference between just using any type of recruiting platform is that in a conversational way, you can go looking for things that you didn't even know that you had to categorize. You didn't have to categorize things in certain ways because you're relying on the solution to go help you navigate all this organizational data that you have at your disposal.
That's right.
Any surprises or key learnings as you were working with this client and either operationalizing that or, through the workshop? The whole industry is kind of learning together, succeeding together and failing together and learning together.
Yeah.
Key things that you think are good pieces of advice that you've discovered along the way.
So I'm a cloud architect at heart. That's what I was brought into Trace3 to help with, and one of the things that we've become really good at over time is this idea of landing zone architecture, which, in the concept of cloud, means that you can create these application-centric environments, manage them or define them through code, and then the idea is that you can rinse, repeat, like build, run an application or a workload, repeat that process over and over again. So this idea applies to AI in a really beautiful way. And what it's emerging is that once an organization agrees that, on the thesis of use case misappropriation, and that they have to prepare for different kinds of AI solutions, including the ability to put any enterprise data set in front of a model and be able to run experiments with courage. Once you agree that that's true, then if you prepare your enterprise with this AI RAG solution, and it's important to pick a platform, just pick a player, like they're all very capable. This client that we were talking to is on Azure, so we're looking at the Azure OpenAI equivalent of landing zone architecture. What emerged as a surprise was how once they were at landing zone ready and they were able to just kind of hand off environments that folks could experiment with internally, the surprise was the number of requests from their internal consumers. So if we're talking about self-service AI, the ability to say, okay, this is the results of the think tank session. We have 400 ideas. These 140 we're solving with Copilot. These 50 we're solving with Studio. These 130 or so we think are RAG. Now you're in a place where you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait to arm people with the ability to run their experiments, and
you're kind of democratizing the ability to do experiments.
Exactly.
Placing it at the edge, and without you having to bottleneck everything through like some central team.
Precisely, and and that's where real magic can occur, right? Is when you give people environments they can play in. The data is encrypted in front of the model. Like we're applying a lot of, let's call it run of the mill or security we're good at and have been good at in the cloud construct for 15 years. To AI, and we have segmented environments, we have private traffic, we have private arenas where you can play with different models, and place interesting data sets in front of to achieve, let's call them first generation results.
Sure.
So the surprising thing was once that was true, how easy it was for the experiments to run. Right. So a lot of people start off on this AI journey thinking that it's so complex and so difficult to kind of get your data, prepare your data, do engineering to produce a result. It's the surprise is how easy it's been for people to adopt an experiment.
Well, I think what's been surprising for me too is just how quickly we've seen people experiment and get to a place to where you prototype something, someone in the organization can prototype something, and within a matter of 2 weeks, you've got a situation where you could say, is this worth investing in more? Or this idea is not going to work without massive investment, or we're not thinking about it the appropriate way. And I do think that you're underscoring a really important point, which is organizations who can experiment quickly and then turn things into production grade quickly are ones who've already taken the time to establish standards on what their AI platform is going to be, and how they're going to govern risk and manage risk around those environments, so they can experiment quickly, empower people, and then turn it into production grade without a ton of chaos. It's like the inverse of that would be, Trace3, obviously, like we have to do this. We have so many different partners that we work with. We've got experiments going on in Google's cloud, AWS, Microsoft. We have on-premise versions of these things. We have to support all those different kinds of environments. But for an organization, if you want to be able to experiment, you don't necessarily want your population going off choosing any tools they want, any platforms they want, experimenting, and how are they going to store the data and how they're thinking about that, and then wind up in a nightmare scenario. I think we learn lessons the hard way from RPA, even just citizen data scientists experiments with even just something as simple as a report. The second that a report is done on some unauthorized tool and is a report someone's relying on, now someone has to support it. It's in production. Same thing on automation that's being created by people that you're not aware of, that the organization starts to rely on, and that breaks, and no technology department is aware of how they were supposed to operationalize this because you weren't settled on platforms and a way to experiment to turn things into production grade.
Yes, absolutely. And the beauty of building an AI governance, again, minimum viable program, is that it applies to all facets of AI adoption. So yeah, I read something really interesting by I believe it was George Westerman, who talked about guardrails in a governance program being akin to like a mountain road. And if you're on a mountain road and there's a guardrail on it, which there should be, hopefully you're not touching it a lot, right? Like it's there to inform you.
If there wasn't, you're probably not here to talk about it today.
Right. You don't want to be touching it or bumping into it a lot. And so that's I think it's important to think about that when you build an AI governance program, especially around AI. So there is a concept of just enough security to get going.
Yeah. I've also heard it put it another way. Like if you're doing it gently like that, you're actually creating an enablement program is the way people should think about it, versus like this heavy like governance program. Like you are creating governance, but you're actually creating enablements because you're allowing people to, do what they need to do without worrying about
managing risk and safety at the same time.
Flying off the side of the mountain.
But it's a really interesting time because we've never seen pressure like this before in our industry to accelerate safely.
So we've seen a huge rise in our client base asking about governance and related risk management. I think that there's some confusion also just like what the terms mean, and also how heavy something needs to be in order to get started versus your maturity over a period of years. So when you talk about doing using governance to create soft guardrails, create enablements, but then do that in a quick way so that you can start working and start experimenting. How do you think about governance from like a quick start perspective?
Yeah, so we don't take emotional positions on governance. We do like to follow frameworks. We've created some intellectual property around our aggregation of interesting data around the concepts of trustworthy AI. Probably too much for this podcast.
Maybe another episode.
Yeah, perhaps. But I'll say this. So there are some interesting frameworks from ISO, from NIST, the NIST AI RMF, that provides fantastic guidance. It is open for interpretation, so there is an exercise there where you have to translate those ideas into actionable controls that you can implement as a part of your governance program. And then there's also, from an MVP perspective, we love the guidance that's offered by OWASP. So they have a top 10 for LLMs, and in that there's coverage on key concepts like minimizing data leakage, protecting against over-reliance. You mentioned over-reliance a moment ago. And other key components of adopting AI. So if you're looking to start as an enterprise, not forgetting also that a lot of the security that applies to AI technology adopted in cloud or private cloud, we're already really good at. I think a lot of people forget about those gains over the last 15 years as well. So things like encrypting and protecting data sets, segregating traffic and microsegmentation, all those things that are required to create repeatable AI environments. We're really good at that stuff, And so when you add in some AI specific controls like prompt firewalling, model poisoning, data leakage, those kinds of things, and you couple that with often an AI governance program will inform or pour some rocket fuel on a sensitive data management program as well. We're seeing that in enterprises all around the country. But the combination of those two things, taking a sensitive data first approach, documenting acceptable use and your company's philosophy on AI, interpreting the OWASP Top 10 into some actionable controls to begin your AI security journey or to augment your security practices with AI specific controls, and then adhering long term to an ISO or an AI RMF standard from NIST. Those are fantastic places to start.
Yeah, really great advice. And I think that the industry as a whole is kind of taking a breath right now. Like there's a little bit of a lull. I think there was this furious amount of activity that occurred at the beginning of the year and obviously through all of last year. And people are realizing that this is where the major hurdles are in being able to solve for these problems. Like if I don't solve for how I think about risk management around data, or how I think about both now and in the future of how regulation might affect the way I think about my governance program, then I'll have real problems down the line. And we're seeing a lot of experimentation come to a screeching halt as people go back and revisit strategy, revisit governance and risk, and start to create some momentum in that front. As you start thinking about the future, I mean, you've been involved in a lot of experiments now, working with a lot of different clients, a lot of different kinds of problems. Are you seeing any certain kinds of trends in real use cases out there that are gaining value? I think this question comes up all the time of, well, we've got a lot of ideas, but what are other people doing? Are there certain areas where we're seeing clearer lines of success? And whether that's a specific type of use case that you're seeing out there, or just a trend in a type of use cases that maybe are all categorized together.
Yeah, I think it's really important to take like the kind of the stagger effect of stitched together improvements in workflow and business process, empowered by, and let's be specific about Gen AI, because that's the kind of the hot topic, powered by Gen AI. So if even with something as simple as an out-of-the-box solution as Copilot, and I hate to use the term simple about Copilot, but like in the grand scheme of things, from the consumer's perspective, it's an out-of-the-box solution. So even with something as simple as Copilot, it's important to take a look at the aggregated effect of individual bits of impact. So it's just my personal experience. So it helps me summarize teams. It helps me plan my week next week. It helps me draw to my attention like all of my client interactions that are coming up for the next 7 days. I have a series of prompts that I'm falling in love with. But no one thing is the thing that I can't live without. It's the aggregated effect of now having a companion.
Well, hopefully Copilot doesn't start thinking that it's also falling in love with you and also can't live without you.
There's a YouTube video about this. And it's the same with broader enterprise adoption of AI. So it's really important to start small with stitching together two groups, for example. One interesting scenario is we have an array of consultants at Trace3. We have a lot of data in our CRM about like our upcoming engagements. An interesting use of Copilot of a Copilot agent is to look at the upcoming resource schedule and to create through automation a kind of a feedback loop to our recruiting team that says, hey, look, we've got this in the pipeline. We need to be sourcing these types of people for scale, because we happen to be very successful in the market. And so those little kind of hooks between teams, between departments, between individuals, I think we're really going to see some amazing impacts with these agent deployments over the next 12 months. And I think that's the most interesting thing that's happening. As the first 18 months of Gen AI, moments of awe have been all driven by it's sitting there and it's kind of blinking at you, and you have to inspire it into action, and get back value. And it's been wonderful. It's been one of the most incredible things I've experienced from a technology perspective. But what's happening now is we're getting to a place where we can really drive these automated events, and we're in like kind of a phase 2.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be really, really interesting as we go further and further into like this unsupervised deployment of AI autonomy.
Yeah. Well, what becomes interesting about that is, I do think that we see a trend where you roll out something like a Copilot, individual productivity, and it takes a long time for people to change the way that they work and to realize that they have certain things at their disposal. Mm-hmm. And so when you leave it up to the imagination of like, well, I need to inspire my Copilot to help me versus the Copilot maybe inspiring you on a daily basis, then you wind up in this scenario where you say, hey, can you give me the insights on, these news articles? I need like the points, and then somebody goes off and they do that in the old way. And we said, well, why didn't you just do that with Copilot? And it's like, oh, I forgot it was there. Like, I'm not used to using it like that. And you hear this over and over and over again of all these things that people could be doing in Copilot, and Copilot implementations may have stalled out in certain organizations. They're not seeing like the kind of adoption they thought they were getting. And it's because people are going back to working the way that they've always worked and forgetting that they could be, doing it much more efficiently by having something help them go do that. And so this whole concept of, well, do you spend a ton of time working on adoption, on organizational change management, enablement, and forcing people to work differently? Or do you start reimagining how entire departments and processes and workflows should work inside a business, kind of taking this like AI native approach and forcing the change, because now you're changing the way that people work versus like reminding them to inspire themselves to figure out how they work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's really interesting, but I think you kind of have to do both. We have 11 major enterprises as Trace3 that we've engaged on, kind of large or Copilot deployments of significance, let's just say. Across those engagements, we ran some interesting aggregated survey data. And while only 78% of people who have ever experienced Copilot said that, that it improved their productivity, 93% of people said they wouldn't give it up. So
wait, it's not helping me with productivity, but I don't want to lose it.
Could you imagine living, like having, been a Copilot user for 4 or 5 months? Could you imagine not having Copilot? I couldn't. Like I feel like I would.
The only
you could never go back.
So it'd be the equivalent of, I've got a Porsche 911. I don't have one, but like if in this imaginary scenario, I had one. And I know that I could drive 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, but I choose not to. But I still want my Porsche. What's the combination of like? Is it I want to be a part of this movement and I want this cool new technology, but I haven't really figured out how to make myself more productive, but I still don't want to lose it. And we see that even in our own organization where people aren't using it, but they don't want to give up their licenses.
I think the gap is, if I'll give you a story. So if I told you, hey, go watch Mad Max Furiosa, it's the greatest epic saga of all time.
This is reality. This is your.
Yeah,
you're making a provocative statement.
Suppose we had this conversation, and then you went and watched.
But this is your real opinion.
No.
Oh,
come on now. No.
I want to anchor ourselves in reality here.
So I say, Tony, go watch Mad Max Furiosa. It's the greatest epic saga of all time, greatest movie ever made, and you go watch it, and you leave that movie going, God, that was awful.
I'm like, how many drinks did you have?
That was awful, and Chris has terrible opinions. But if you go in like just wanting to be entertained by some graphics and spectacle, and I don't say those words, you might come out quite impressed with the fact that it kept you entertained for 2 hours. It's the same effect. So there's been so much hype around Copilot being all the things, and kind of creating this like massive misinterpretation of its appropriate scope, that only 78% of people are going, yeah, I see the value. But if you try to rip it away, it's almost unanimous in that nobody wants to give it up, because actually it is improving productivity in many significant ways. I don't think anybody who's ever experienced taking meeting minutes out of Teams after a meeting has ended would ever want to go back to just authoring notes while a meeting's taking place themselves.
Yeah.
Just as an example.
Unless you're a really big fan of like your pen and paper or something like that.
Yeah. So that's where I think where that discrepancy is, in that it's people have too high of their expectations for the platform, or have misinterpreted what it's supposed to be. But it's a huge value delivery solution.
Chris, before we wrap up, any final words of wisdom for the audience out there?
Yeah, if I could summarize our approach to the market, it's really that if you're going to be a serious enterprise about AI adoption, you've really got to think about it in multiple dimensions, You've got to have the courage to run experiments because we're seeing them in many, many situations leading directly to competitive edge and reimagined business processes. But you can't just do one thing. It can't just be an AI assistant, and it can't just be empowering one business for use case X, whatever that may be. My best advice, the most elegant adoption we're seeing is when organizations are taking an in-depth, multi-layered AI adoption strategy. And so, and to do all that with a philosophy that accelerates the adoption, but also takes into consideration safety and responsibility. So it's an exciting time to be in tech. And so I just think my main advice is to be courageous.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, amazing episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think we all learned a lot from your experiences, and would love to have you back again on the show in another episode as we continue to learn more about what's out there. Exciting new use cases come up. We'll be sure to have you back, and we'll dig in again.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
You've been listening to LiveAI. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. This episode is sponsored by Trace3. To learn more about why you should connect with them, about your enterprise practical AI use case, visit them at trace3.com or look for them on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.